Sweet potato casserole is the best Thanksgiving food.
Nice.
Apparently that's not a thing everywhere in the world, but guess what? It is in the South, and it's delicious.
We didn't have any sweet potatoes at our Thanksgiving.
Oh, man, it's not sweet potatoes. Oh, my gosh. I'm going to have to break up with you, man.
Sweet potato?
Sweet potato casserole. Very different from sweet potatoes. Layer of crusted marshmallows on top of sweet potatoes and pineapple. It's basically like, how sweet can we make this dish? It really tastes like it just is.
Was there a layer of chocolate in there?
No, that would ruin it. Marshmallow, sweet potatoes. It's great, man. Also, the pecan pie that my mom made literally tasted like that crack bar from Momofuku Milk Bar. It was like just like a candy bar turned into a pie, and it was amazing.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Speaking of milk, Katie and I went there before Thanksgiving, and we got the thing you're always talking about. The milkshake.
Yeah, the milk quake.
Yeah. With the birthday cake truffles.
Nice. How'd you think of it?
It was unbelievable.
So which one did you go to? Not the one in my neighborhood.
No, we went downtown. So there's a one.
Flagship or
no Flagship.
Was the milk quake on the menu?
It was like a shake
Yeah.
with birthday cake truffle added in.
Okay, so you got a shake.
Yeah.
With birthday cake truffle.
It was like a McFlurry.
Okay, it was thick though? Or was it thin?
They gave it, we had a straw, but it was
too thick to drink with the straw?
No, it was like a wide straw.
Okay. You might have not had the milk quake. So this is a little hot tip. This is something
like an
even better.
off-menu item?
It's off menu. It used to be on the menu. If you're ever in New York City, you should definitely visit Momofuku Milk Bar. A lot of people know it now because there was a Netflix special, but it's like it's one of those special New York places. And until recently, you would be able to find the milk quake on the menu. And the milk quake is like a flurry. It's like they mix it. They don't make a milkshake, so they don't pour milk in. It's like the soft serve ice cream with maybe a little bit of milk, and then you can get the birthday cake truffle in it, and then they mix it together. And you kind of eat it. But
no, we didn't. This was all straw.
Got you. The milkshakes sometimes I find are like really thin. They're too thin for me. But it sounds like yours was better because the last time I had a milkshake, it was like way too. It was almost like drinking milk, and it was like no. So it was good.
It tasted like cake batter.
Okay, yeah, nice. Yeah, so then they're using the ice cream. So maybe they're tweaking it, but this is what you want to do. You want to go somewhere and you have to be nice because they're not going to do it if you're not nice because it's now a specialty item for the flagship store that either already exists or is coming to Brooklyn, I think.
Where's the okay, it's in
I think it's somewhere in Brooklyn. But it's called a milk quake, and then you ask for it with the birthday cakes, and it's amazing. There's actually a lot of stuff that I don't really like particularly love at milk, but that one is insane. Nice. Also because it's super sweet, and I have found out that I have like a major sweet tooth. I mean, a lot of people have a sweet tooth, but I there's something I'll eat, and it's like hyper condensed, like most sweetness per square inch, and I like that stuff. So if you eat things and you're like, oh, that's too sweet for me, like you probably won't like this. But if you like sweet things, you got to give it a shot.
Whatever we had was delicious.
Yeah, nice. Like the compost cookie, that's a disappointment for me. But like the milk quake is good to go.
A lot of people like the compost cookie.
They have another cookie that I like that has like marshmallows in it. See, you need to be more sweet for me to like it. The birthday cake truffles are amazing too on their own, but they're like extremely dense and sweet.
Oh yeah,
I can only eat like one of them, maybe two.
Yeah, you could eat 3.
Cool, man. And then you had a nice meal, right? You were in town for Thanksgiving?
We went to Boston, and then we all came back to New York. So
it was actually my first Thanksgiving not in New York in like the last 3 years, because usually I hang out with my aunt and her rich friend in their apartment that overlooks the Macy's Day Parade.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
No parade this year.
No parade this year, yeah. First time in a while. Although I saw on the TV that it was windy. I think they're getting softer every year, and it's like a little bit of wind, and they're like, we can't risk it. And so like the floats were not even that high. They were so low because they've had some. But George, the guy who owns the apartment that I go to, he's been doing parties at his house for Macy's for 30 years. So he has photos from like 30 years ago, when they were in their 30s doing it. And it's so cool to see everyone dressed up in like this old furniture and all this, weird art and all this kind of stuff. And the balloons were so high, you could reach out and almost touch them from his balcony on like the 5th floor or whatever. So they used to be at the treetops right on Central Park.
What are they now?
And now they're like, if you watch, like if you go on YouTube and you just look at like Macy's Parade 2019, you'll see they're like really low because they're worried about, apparently there was, I don't know, maybe someone got like I don't know, a renegade balloon and too windy a day murdered somebody. And so now they're like, we can't let them go too high anymore.
How cool would it be if a balloon got loose and it was just floating through in between the
and then
buildings.
Murdered you? That would be a pretty good way to go. Like if you had to die by like Macy's parade balloon.
I'm just saying it floats through the buildings.
I mean, something tragic must have happened for them to start pulling it down. Peter, a dear friend of ours, murdered by the Spider-Man balloon.
How awful are you going to feel when it turns out that that's what happened? Poor child.
Yeah, like a baby in a carriage. Spyro the Dragon just comes flying down Fifth Avenue, just completely topples him over. This is a podcast about programming. I made a new app.
Nice.
I was showing it to you. It's another Hasura React app.
What does it do?
I'm getting faster. I'm getting better with it. It's another nutrition app. So the last app I was feeling bad about myself and I made a recipes app, and this time I was feeling bad about myself and I made a nutrition tracking app. So we'll just see. You know, I'm just eventually my home screen is just going to be different health emojis and many apps. And eventually, you know, there is a reason that, you know, all I need is an app, and then I'm going to have a 6-pack and $1 million, right? That's all it takes.
What do we say? Like, not every problem is a technical problem. Yeah. This might be in that category.
I refuse to believe it. But I started doing this thing on the iOS Notes app where I just simplified like my nutrition tracking, which I was trying to do like counting calories before. And this one I just say like, you know, basically like I could just have a checkbox that's like, is this beer or cake or equivalent? Yes or no. And so I get like everything I eat either gets a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And that's it.
That's a pretty good tracking system.
You know, keep it simple, right?
Yeah.
I think I'm a big believer in like Dave Ramsey's financial advice at a high level, because he makes the point, like his whole shtick is that with like saving money and accumulating wealth, it's like a behavior problem, not like a knowledge problem. Not to say that there's no knowledge that's useful, but 99% of it is behavior, like just spending less than you earn, saving some each month, something like that, right? And I think it's the same probably with nutrition. Like there's lots of knowledge out there that's good and useful, but 99% of it is behavior.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. Also from my personal experience, it's also true. Like getting the right workout is nothing compared to like
showing up at the gym.
Yeah. Or just not eating that extra slice of pie.
Or Momofuku milk plate.
Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't start off a podcast with my, impressive display of knowledge of treats and how sweet my tooth is. So I had started doing that in my notes app for a while, which was like working out, and it was pretty cool. But like, so I gave myself a thumbs up, thumbs down, and I was basically shooting for like 75% compliance, which is not even that good. Like I really would rather be at like 80 or 85 or 90. Like if you think about it, if you're talking to someone and you're like, you're trying to lose weight or you have this fitness goal and your like compliance was like 75%, it's not really that. It's like a C. It's like, how much do you really want this? Like 1 out of every 4 food decisions you make is like basically drinking a beer or eating cake or something, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it's going to be harder to move towards your goals. Whereas like 80% is like really good. But then you start doing this method and you realize like 75 is actually pretty tough. Well, especially when you're on vacation. But so I was doing this in the notes app, giving every food decision like a thumbs up or thumbs down. And then I wanted to see what my compliance was. So it started getting annoying because I'd have to go back through and say, oh, this week I've had, if I want to know on Saturday if I'm on track, because I was trying to get it like at the end of the week, right? So Saturday, am I on track? Oh, I've had 20 meals, 4 or 5 X's or whatever. And so it was annoying. So I was like, this would be a perfect little app with computer properties, basically. Mm-hmm. And just an easier way to like add the data and all this stuff. So that was the app that I made.
Nice.
So I wanted to do Hasura because I just was like inspired one night to just kind of start banging it out. And I didn't want to like waste too much time thinking about tech stack and all that stuff. So I had already done this before. I knew Hasura, I knew GraphQL, how it worked. And so I built the static app, new Create React app, Tailwind installed, got the static part working, and then created Hasura, created some data locally, and then I knew I wanted to get like the networking code in there. So I had like meals as like a JavaScript array. And it was like ID, item was the text description, good was a Boolean, true or false, and then date. So I could kind of group it by day. And that's when I wanted to, get real data from the network. Went over to Hasura. Best part, like I already know my schema, just create it. And then it came to querying the actual data. So actually I actually did it with Mirage first because I had the Mirage mocking code for GraphQL from my other recipes app. So I copied that over, and it's like pretty simple. It's like pretty straightforward. This is when I was thinking how cool it would be if there was a Mirage Hasura plugin, because GraphQL is typed. So if you give me a GraphQL schema, like I can implement that with my server. But the way Hasura goes from schema to the queries and mutations it provides is like a Hasura specific thing.
It's like given a GraphQL schema, here's a set of mutations.
Not even. Given a Postgres schema, here's the opinions we're going to make. We're going to call it, the query will be meals, and then meals _ by _ PK for primary key.
Awesome.
So that's part of the schema, the GraphQL like types that are defined and everything. And but that can be derived from the models and relationships, which Mirage already knows about. So you could basically copy like the schema in the same way that we like read in Ember data models to Mirage. If you told me like you have a meals table and it has these 4 attributes, boom, I could, if like Mirage Hasura thing existed, npm package existed, that would be enough to give me basically the same server that Hasura gives you in Mirage, where you have the queries, you have the order by, you have the pagination, the offsets, the filters, all that stuff. So that's potentially like a very, very cool experience.
Yeah. Super cool.
Yeah.
And you don't even need to read. I was thinking like you would somehow plug into Hasura and like read all the things.
I mean, that would be another cool thing, because a lot of people we've talked to who use GraphQL do share GraphQL schemas backend. It's basically like a build artifact of the backend that you ingest in your front end somehow. And that way you know what the queries are and everything. So you could imagine like having a Mirage GraphQL package that knows how to read a schema and then has like auto resolvers that's like matches to the models in the ORM somehow.
I see.
But this would be even more like, this could be even more streamlined as far as an experience goes. Because I basically copied over the stuff from recipes, changed like the attributes a little bit, changed from recipes to meals. And then I had like my Mirage server working and responding to GraphQL. And it's pretty cool because it's like giving me good feedback. Oh, you're trying to do this. This doesn't exist on the thing or whatever. So then, moved those meals into Mirage, and then I had it working. Like it was pulling it from Mirage, add a loading screen, went and switched it over to Hasura, and it all worked. It's pretty sweet.
Nice.
Took like an hour, whole thing, that part. Like I got that far in like an hour from like, either I had done a little bit of like Tailwind design stuff before, but like not a lot. And that was all wired up in an hour. So I had it like running on Netlify and like reading from like production Hasura.
And what the Hasura you deployed, like the one-click deploy?
One-click to Heroku,
nice. And
then use the UI to like build your schema, not waiting for like migrations, not waiting for like redeploying, nothing like that. Just like clicking a button, like pointing to it, and like it just works.
An hour. Hearing that you did this in an hour is like really impressive, because I feel like when I think of an app idea, it takes me an hour just to finalize the thought. No, when I think of an app idea, it's when I think about the front end and the back end. Like it takes me way longer to build that.
That's the thing. I realized this, like how we have built a lot of apps over the years, and it's just like having 2 apps and even 2 GitHub repositories already is like a disqualifier for like a hack project that you're just like, you're feeling motivated and inspired. You don't want anything to stop you when you're in that mode.
That is a great realization. Yeah. Having just two GitHub URLs is like, oh crap, this thing feels professional.
Yes, for sure. And dude, even like adding files is like a blocker right there. Like I'm just like coding and like pulling things out, and like I have a file that's like 300 lines that has like 5 components or whatever, and it's great. It's fine. It works great. Like I'm not thinking about any of that stuff, and it's great. Like I just want to get it working, Mm-hmm. And like I want to try it out on my phone as fast as possible, like saving real data. So like every little thing, I just love that there wasn't friction. So I used some new stuff on this project. It was interesting. So when it comes time to actually execute the GraphQL query, with my recipes app, I wanted to do it all with like React APIs, no libraries. And so I had like a use effect that uses the GraphQL library to like parse the GraphQL string query and then like actually run it. I think I used fetch or something like that and made like a post request. My recipes app also had like these weird like hooks when I was first learning React, and hooks like use resource and it's like really bad, you know. Because I wanted to do caching and stuff. This one I was like, I just want the easiest thing possible. And now that I'm a little bit more familiar with the React ecosystem and which libraries are kind of popular, I know Apollo is popular, but I still didn't want to go that far because I know there's a lot there. I knew like URQL, which is URQL, which is like Universal React Querying Library, something like that, from Formidable Labs, who does a lot of good open source in the React community, was popular and took advantage of hooks and was talking about suspense features, all that kind of stuff. So I just figured I would use that and just wanted something simple as possible. So they give you a function that's like use query, you pass it your GraphQL query, and then you get back like the data and the loading state and stuff like that. So that was great. And then it took like another hour or two, maybe a little bit more. But all in all, I think I've spent like 3 or 4 hours on the project to add a form to do create, update, and delete. So I have like a list of meals that shows like thumbs up, thumbs down, my total at the top, which is like all derived values on the client right now calculated. And then to create, I want to like press plus and have a little modal show up, installed reach dialog, which is like a renderless dialog. I mean, it renders something and it has some styles, but it's basically like maximally flexible and composable. So I can just style it with Tailwind. And then for the form, I use this library called Formik, which is like another popular one that I had kind of come to know. Again, when I first built my React app for recipes, forms, I wanted to understand, this is something we've run into a lot, like what came up in the last few weeks in discussion, which is like when you have a form and you want local state. I ran into this one coding with Atom too. If like the parent fetches like the to-dos and then passes a to-do into like a to-do form component, the local component, the form like makes a local to-do by like copying it. And then like if you update it and like need to call an action up, it's a weird thing. Mm-hmm. I found this tweet discussion and they were talking about like if your component is like controlled versus uncontrolled. This is something I need to investigate. You know controlled and uncontrolled?
No, can you explain?
So it's basically is your component in Ember terms, it's like does it have its own state, or is it like data down, pure data down actions up, what we would call? So like if you have like an input helper, like the input component is like stateful, you pass it value and like it has its own state. Whereas if you make like a color picker, it's data down actions up, it doesn't have its own state. It gets props for the current color. And then if you choose a color, it just delegates to the parent. And so in React parlance, that's called a controlled component is one that has its own state and manages its own state. And an uncontrolled is one that delegates out. And there was this thread with Dan and other folks talking about like the stale state issues that we keep running into with use effect. And he was saying that like this doesn't happen if you only are a controlled component or an uncontrolled, and being both is this weird spot. And that's actually where some of the problem is.
I see. So the fact that you're creating a local to do and modifying it, coupled with the fact that you're also sending data back up to the parent,
did change
creates these issues.
Exactly. So I was kind of interested. I need to like do a minimal reproduction. We should look at it because that seems totally valid to me. Like you have a form component, it needs its own state because like it's state that's for the form component. Like the global to do, it doesn't matter. Like you're mutating a little draft in this thing. And then you need to say like commit changes. But you need to send the state of the local to do to the parent so it knows what the changes are.
Yeah.
So
you think there's a middle ground where you're mostly controlled, but you have some uncontrolled stuff?
It seems like a valid thing for me to want to build a component like that. But maybe it's the fact that the local thing is like derived from the parent. I'm not really sure yet.
Well, just thinking of like a use case here, like oftentimes we say like, okay, don't invest in this data down actions up uncontrolled pattern until you need like the configurability,
right?
Until you need like you're rendering the component in two different spots,
right?
And they both need to do something. But at that point, we wouldn't take a controlled component and make the whole thing uncontrolled,
right?
We would add something like
did save,
yeah. After save,
yeah,
whatever.
Exactly.
We would just add that one thing. We would only make configurable what needs to be configurable.
Exactly.
So it seems like these things should be able to exist
on a spectrum.
Yeah,
for sure. Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. So I think it was actually Ken Wheeler from Formidable Labs, or at least he used to work there, who said, "Oh, I just went ahead and made it uncontrolled, and now like the problem went away." And I was like, we need to investigate this because that seems weird to me. So anyways, that was a little diversion because I think it's just another interesting tidbit. But coming back to the app, no more of that, because I had a form, but instead of having to like create some new state for local meal, when I go to edit a meal or create a meal, and then, the parent owns like the list of all meals. So you want a way to communicate there. I just used Formik, which gives you a form, basically a form from Rails, or like what we've built in our EmberMap series, that holds a model and holds its own state. And so the form gets the initial values as like a POJO, and then you can like, it gives you like form input field components that are like mutating that state. And then it gives you like a submit callback that gives you like the latest values. So like, whatever they're doing for the implementation, you don't care about. And like, I just didn't have to do any of that stuff.
Nice.
So that that was a Formik form and a reach dialog, styled great. It's also great, like these libraries, a lot of times libraries I've made or used in the Ember community, or even I think libraries in the React community before, like the renderless pattern was really well understood, try to just do a lot of things. There's like, you render a dialogue and like, do you want it like this or that? Here's how you change like this thing. Instead, like all of these libraries, like the Formik one and the dialogue one in particular, are just like, you can go to town and do whatever you want. And it's very powerful because it's like, here's the one way to render a dialogue. Like you just render this component, and here are like the functional props we expose, like on dismiss when you click in the window outside of it, or whatever. But yeah, I just never felt restricted. I felt like these were really good libraries with really good APIs.
Nice. There was a big thread on Hacker News last week about headless components.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What was it like? What was the root
someone
article or share?
Someone made a React table library.
Got you.
It basically, like in the very beginning of the README, they said this is a headless component, and here's the benefit.
I see.
Headless components are what we call like renderless components. But
right.
Yeah, the whole idea behind, just giving you being able to compose the bits that you need.
Right.
So pretty cool.
Very cool. Really powerful. And just, like Reach Modal does some cool stuff. It like auto focuses the first field, the first focusable element in the dialogue, because that's like part of the spec. Like that's part of good keyboard practices, because if you don't focus something and a keyboard user opens a dialogue and the focus doesn't change there, they have no idea. Because like the DOM where the focus is not changing, so they have no idea that something changed.
Do they specifically focus the first input?
The first focusable element. So if it happens to be an input, then it will do it. And that's what my app does, which is pretty cool, because you click plus and like the input is already focused.
I noticed that when I was using your app. I thought that was something you did.
No, I didn't do that. That's like the default behavior.
Interesting.
And it's actually, there's times where it's a little confusing because like the keyboard can hide the thing. So I need to look at that. So, and they have a way to change that, but like that is a default behavior. It's pretty cool.
Nice.
And they also have like escape key to dismiss the modal. Just works. Just little things like, yeah, for sure. And click on the modal to dismiss it. If you want to make like a full screen modal, which I usually do on mobile apps, like you just Tailwind classes like with full height screen, width screen, like you can just go to town with it. So nice. Like it's pretty awesome. It's really cool. So yeah, the form thing works. This was the interesting thing, which was pretty unexpected. So my form has the latest values from my edits, and then I call like on submit with my changes. And someone just rolled something by. Hopefully it wasn't, nothing illegal is happening behind you. And call it out to the parent, or maybe not even, maybe my form like does the mutation. actually, yeah, form does a mutation because that's how we like to make it. Like the form is just a smart form or whatever. And so it creates a new recipe. And the query, like the GraphQL query, is like pretty simple. It's like insert recipe, insert meals, and it's like whatever Hasura gave me. And like URQL doesn't know I'm using Hasura, and I don't have any schema information anywhere. So I still need to read about this, but basically when I insert the thing and then I dismiss the modal, the homepage refreshes, the query on the homepage refreshes and the new recipe shows up there, even though the homepage had no idea I was off creating, meal. The homepage had no idea I was off creating a meal in the form.
So I have a question here.
Yeah.
I can think of like two ways this would happen. One is this URQL library is smart enough to know that what meals are, and it knows that you inserted a meal and that you're reading meals here. So it's just going to rerun that read meals hook. Or the other idea is like there's some sort of WebSocket connection. So you're going through the server, but the server's telling this component, whatever was using this URQL query, like, I have new data. So do you know which it is?
Yeah, I don't think it's the second one. I do think GraphQL has subscriptions. I think Hasura supports that too. But I think here, let me see my phone. I'm just going to pull it up while I'm kind of talking because I know they talk about it. I just literally haven't looked at it yet. But they basically invalidate that query from the homepage. So they invalidate it somehow. Like they know it's invalid and they rerun it.
Okay.
So it said something like the name is similar, like the name of the query. So you know how GraphQL has like an underscore like type name or something like that? It's something like that they actually know that these two queries are connected. But like I need to know how far that goes, right? Like anyways, it just worked, and I did update and delete and it worked as well. So basically,
you thought you were going to have to send like some like,
did
homepage,
save, append to a list. Again, in my recipes app, I was doing all this by hand. I was using an effect to save things. I was calling back, and I was, handling the case. Again, my little use resource hook was like my own little ORM, which is like I have the canonical list of recipes here. If someone edits or adds one, I need to make sure and update that canonical list. But with URQL, like you don't have to do any of that. Here, why don't I pull this up while that illegal thing is happening behind you? It's like someone's leg hanging out of like a laundry basket. I just watched The Irishman, so I've got like mafia scenes in my brain. So it was amazing how much less I had to worry about. Now, this was an interesting thing, right? If you think about it, in Ember Data does know the queries are connected because everything is derived from like models that you're working on. So I call like store create meal. And so anywhere that says store find all meals is going to know about that actually before I even send it over to the backend. Now, because the homepage query is independent from this page and it reloads, there's like a time where my app is in like an invalid state, you could say, if you wanted it to be like optimistic, where I create the new page and I go back home and I don't see my new thing, and then it all of a sudden shows up because they do like a background reload kind of thing.
Gotcha.
And they have like different caching strategies. So you can just like say like prefer cache, prefer network only, like cache first. Like they have a couple of different strategies there.
Can you get control of that? Because like you could express that as like it is loading. I think there's going to be a new one, but I'm refreshing.
Yep.
I don't know yet, but I'm pretty sure there will be.
I think the use query hook gives you like response.data and like response dot like pending or something like that. Okay. Fetching, something like that. But anyways, it was pretty incredible like how much less I had to do using these libraries. Between Formik and URQL, I had an ORM-like experience in the React app.
Yeah, really
which
nice.
Is really cool. And it also made me just chuckle because
it's even more
I know it's like super unfashionable to like want to use ORMs in your React app.
I don't buy that.
This is like, I started thinking about this and I was getting so like, not emo, but so this works, but like okay, how far does this go? An ORM takes you to the complete thing because it understands your whole schema, right? What if a recipe has many ingredients and I create an ingredient over here? Would that then know to invalidate the homepage query and refetch it? I don't know, maybe. But I'm sure there's a point at which it breaks down and there's, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I don't think they can know every connection. I think it's like
I absolutely know what you're saying. In my mind, I'm thinking, well, there's a point where you do like a subscription from the back end, and the back end can tell you like, hey, and something did something where ingredients changed.
But even if you didn't have, but your front end, if it was rich enough and it was a true ORM, would know that in the same way like Rails ORMs knows that, or even Ember Data knows that. You know what I'm saying? So I was just chuckling because it's like, you actually just want an ORM here. Like, basically, like, it's great that, I mean, GraphQL is awesome. So like the part that was really cool was like, I was telling you earlier, I wanted the homepage to be sorted. And so I just go to Hasura and just visit GraphQL, and just on the left hand, I see all of my fields, all the options, limit, offset, sort. I don't have to look those up in a guide at all. They're all there. I click on the button. I copy my production query from the homepage of my React app to GraphQL in Hasura. And then I click on the left-hand side, sort, and then I click date. And I click on it. And so I know the query works because I can see it. I change it to descending, which I just do with the interface. I'm not reading any documentation this whole time. It works. I copy it and I replace it. It's like one line that's different. So I just copy that one line with those arguments into my React app, and then that's it. It's done. And it's like, to me, like doing, that was insane. Like sorting by a field and then making it descending and getting it. That was insane. That was like so awesome.
Yeah. When I hear this, I just think of like this sweet spot between, like, I don't want to write code. I want to use a GUI to do things.
Yeah.
But like the reality is you can't build a whole app like that today.
Right. Right.
And so this is like a perfect middle ground.
Totally.
Take some code, paste it into a GUI, edit it, copy it back, cut it back out, and paste it back to your code base.
And just know it works because it just worked. And it's type checked and everything.
And you're not giving up being a programmer or coding, right? You're not giving, like, you're not like, it's not like a trade-off where I get more from doing the GUI stuff. It's always been that. So it's a nice little sweet spot.
For sure. So that was insanely awesome because like, yeah, it was just awesome. It's the idea of like adding an endpoint to a backend that supports sorting and ascending and descending, and then writing a test to make sure that my endpoint does that, and then going to my front end, running my backend and front end, and doing that. It was just like, holy crap, man, that was insane.
You know, it's funny that I consider us knowledgeable on data loading, right? From all the Ember Data stuff, storefront stuff, Mirage stuff we've done, and then like all the Ruby ORM experience we have. It's interesting that the thing that always really impresses us is like the discoverability. It's that's why we love GraphQL, or that's what our initial impressions of GraphQL are. Yeah, it's just interesting. It's
for sure. Like the format is like a detail. Like the payload, what it looks like is like a detail. Whereas like for a lot of people, it's actually a feature, like that your result looks like the query and is going to be how you render it in your UI. That's kind of interesting, but it's not actually how I think about things as well. It's more like, how do I get this data into my app?
I think if you ask people about like, why do you like GraphQL? They'd say like, oh, you don't, what are like the party lines? Like you don't overfetch.
Yeah.
It's typed. Those things are nice, but they're not.
That's not what's exciting or fun to use about it.
Yeah. Or at least that's not what
we like.
What we talk about.
Yeah.
What we get excited about. Yeah. It's the discoverability.
Yeah. I mean, the typing helps with the discoverability, right? The reason GraphQL exists is because you have a schema. But like, no, it's like when they say like, oh, you don't send a bad parameter to your backend or something like that. It doesn't really happen when it's more just like, it's just more all of that stuff. It's back to conventions over configurations, right? It's just back to the Rails stuff. Like DHH just sitting there saying, look what I'm not doing. I'm not coming up with a name for my ID column. It's the same. That's exactly how I felt. I was like, look at what I'm not doing. I'm not writing a test to make sure that my query that runs against SQL is like sorting by date ascending, because that's what my front end says. Like that whole layer is just taken care of for me. And it's just the contract. It starts and ends with the GraphQL query, which can be verified in GraphQL and pasted into my React app, and everything from there all the way to the Postgres database on Hasura is taken care of for me. So that's the part that's like magical. Absolutely magical. It's just great. I never want to write. I never want to not write an app a different way because it's just wonderful. I still need to figure out how to do lots of things on Hasura, but I'm more motivated than ever. So the ORM thing is just interesting because like I need to figure out how far the rabbit hole goes with that. But like really, I still find it that I would prefer to be using an Ember data-like interface, assuming it had assuming it worked with GraphQL in a way that kept it discoverable. So you could imagine like an IDE like code auto-suggesting like in the same way like .order by would show you, and so it would be just feel as productive. But there's like a little bit of wiring there, but like it's not too bad with what I have. But again, it's just kind of like, it's just funny. People are like, ORMs are old, or we don't remember when people used ORMs, or why do we need objects? And it's like, we're doing the same. Yeah, we're doing the same thing. This is what you want. It's like weird. We don't have a way to talk about it with these people, because that's what, when I'm looking at this, that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing like objects being related to each other in my UI in a way that is like, what did they call it? The folks using Mirage? Relational.
Integrity.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe we should use that word instead.
Yeah, I think you're right, because...
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do, because my reaction is to roll my eyes and be like, go touch the stove 5 more times. And then let me know if you want to use an oven mitt. But you're right. We do need a way to talk to people.
Because maybe people, when they hear ORM, they think like maybe they're coming from a different place where they worked with something in Java that was insane, a repo, and you have a mapper data thing, and it's like crazy.
Or, I mean, seriously, you mess up your backend models.
Domain
you mess
modeling.
up not even like your database tables.
Yeah.
The relationships to them are messed up. Maybe like you have like composite keys that might mean different things.
Right.
And then
ISBN,
this is like the reality of apps. Today.
Yeah.
20-year-old apps
for
have
sure
tons of bad models. And so, yeah, you can be like ORMs. Screw ORMs. I just want to write my own join statement because
I've been fighting bad abstractions for way too long. So yeah.
But I also, I don't.
Yeah, I think once I add, meals and a couple other models and they have relationships, again, Hasura supports all that. You add like primary key, like foreign keys, you define it, and then boom, you have like query by relationships, include relationships, all that stuff. So, and then like you're going to want the UI to like, again, like the server side resources imply, client side identity. Like you want those things to resolve to the same thing, and you want relational integrity there. So as those things change, as the user edits the things in one place, you want that integrity. So anyway, it's just an interesting experience.
I mean, maybe that is like the best way to convince people here is you can talk about this stuff and use fancy words, but come on, once you use Rails, you just have this like, wow, I don't ever want to go back to writing SQL again.
Yeah, for sure.
So maybe there is a point where you update something and then the homepage just refreshes.
Right.
And
someone
sees that.
And oh, like, wow. I'm using to have to. No, for sure. Because like when I used URQL, it was like the fact that I didn't have to have am I going to make context and put a store equivalent on like a store provider that has like all of my meals. And then when my form component creates a new meal down here in some leaf node, I need to push it to the global context store provider so that everyone reading from the store gets updated. And so how do I do that now? Do I like basically use a store context everywhere, and once the thing saves, I can call a method and put. And I didn't write any of that stuff. But that is how you're thinking about it.
Yeah, that's what URQL's doing under the hood, right?
Yes, you do have a provider that you actually, that's part of the installation. You like wrap your whole app in a provider. So it's doing a lot of stuff. What I'm saying though is like they're still acting like they're just like raw GraphQL queries, which they are, but there's obviously a link between them. Yeah. So I would just like that link to be more explicit. In a sense.
Okay. So
I would like to be thinking about that as I'm using the library, whereas it kind of magically happened to work for me for my use case right now. but it feels like eventually
Is part of this coming from like, look, I actually like this. I want to buy into this.
Yeah.
So give it to me. Like
exactly.
you don't have to hide it from
exactly.
me. Okay.
Which is like basically an ORM, which is basically what I want. An ORM with like an instant conventional backend, but like you can't say those words or something. No,
I get what you mean. And this is where you see like more of the Ember data philosophy coming into play.
Exactly, because I wanted to use GraphQL and I want to use these tools as they're intended to be used. And my first app, I basically tried to create like a ORM, like a client-side cache for my data, because I actually wanted that. It wasn't because I just wanted to, for the sake of architecting. I fetched all the recipes on the homepage, and when I clicked on one of them, I navigated to a new link, and I already had the recipe loaded, so I wanted to reuse it. And when I went back, I wanted those recipes to be reloaded again. So I needed that from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And so I built my best attempt at that, or something very lightweight, where you have a cache and it's in context. And so you have this integrity, right? That's like the equivalent there is like the home page fetches all recipes and the detail page fetches recipe with ID 1. But like when you're expressing that in the API, in terms of the API, you're talking about recipes as the same thing in both cases. Whereas when you write GraphQL, you're not doing that. Although you are in some way, like there's some way that they know to invalidate the thing because they're related.
Right. There's typing information.
It's something about type name or something that it sounds like, but it's not exposed to you. So it's cool in the sense that you just get to write exactly what you need. But to me, it's like, I know there's like some foot guns there, or it feels like it. And I'd rather just be told like, yeah, just have a little bit of a higher level thing. I don't know. Maybe you lose the GraphQL discoverability bit, but like, I almost would rather I would almost rather configure an Ember data like API and say, have it tell me like where to find things, right? And so URQL or whatever the layer on top is like, okay, when I find all, like what does recipe.all mean? It means make this query to this endpoint, and here's all the things that it supports. And then recipe.find, it means this GraphQL query. And then I just do that once in a conventional way, and then I can just use that in my app. And then,
but how would you link those two things?
Well, because the configuration presumably would be like meal all would be like this query, and then meal one would be this query, and that so way like it knows.
Start with a meal. Okay, now tell me how to find all meals. Tell me how to find exactly. It knows it's in the category of meals.
Exactly, something like that. But it would be tricky to make sure you don't lose like that flexible, fast feeling of GraphQL, being able to transfer back and forth. But I feel like you could still do it. But anyways, that's just a long-winded way of saying like there's absolutely the concept of model and relational integrity in this library, but it's like it's just kind of a magical thing.
It's too hidden from you.
And it was awesome when I built it first because it just happened to do what I wanted to do. But as soon as I want some more, like as soon as I want to do an optimistic update, I'm not sure how that will work. Maybe there's an API for it. Maybe it'll be easy. But yeah, a little too hidden, I guess. Or anyways, it was awesome. Like all that to say, like, so that was a really cool experience that it just happened to work. And also I wanted to be like just using these tools as they were intended. And if you're just rendering from Pojos, like that's fine. And if I change things over here, how is that going to update over there? Well, it's just going to invalidate and refetch it. Great. I'll just do it. Great. Yeah. Let's go for it. How do I share computed properties between like models that are in the list and here? Like I'll just do whatever makes sense in the context, like just kind of go for it. And so I try to do that. I try to like shed off my pre-existing opinions for like how to build these kinds of UIs and just use all those tools as they were intended. And it worked out really well for my case. And like, again, stepping back and looking at it, it's pretty cool seeing, the renderless pieces and the Tailwind class, all that stuff working together. It was like, I felt extremely productive. So it was pretty sweet.
Nice.
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah. So I still need to figure out how to authenticate and lock down, because if anyone knew now too my backend URLs, they could just ruin all my data that I wouldn't care about, but they could do it.
What's the worst they could do? Just add in a bunch of junk food?
Just delete. Probably is worse. Like sneak in like candy bars earlier in the week that I wouldn't remember. Oh, shit, I thought I was doing so good. Wait, I remember
you would be so bummed.
That's true. That is worse than just deleting all the data, manipulating my emotional state.
No, the worst thing they could do is tell you ate a bunch of healthy meals in the beginning of the week, because then you're like, oh, I can go drink like 7 beers.
That's true. and then
why am I gaining so much weight?
That's really bad now that I think about it. How long have we been going for?
45 minutes.
Cool. Yeah, let's talk about a little bit more.
Let's the
reason thing.
Yeah.
So you just watched this talk.
Yeah, the React to the Future.
Mm-hmm. Weird name, right?
React
is it because it sounds like Back to the Future? I don't know. It's a weird title name.
I didn't really think much about that. Sorry.
Do you think it's weird?
I like the talk.
Yeah, talk was good.
Yeah, so it was about what made React popular.
So it's by the creator of React, Jordan Walke.
Yeah. He talked about why they created React, what made it popular, some things that they initially had in React that people had a bad reaction to. So I guess let's start there.
Mm-hmm.
I think he puts up a slide that has it's imagine compiled JSX.
Right.
So it's just
Create
data
element,
structures to
array,
create
element div, option, class name, create element, children.
You're right. How would you express an HTML structure tree in just JavaScript?
Yeah.
And it's very, very tree-like.
Yeah.
And I love this because he's like, yeah, people didn't have a great reaction to this. And he zooms in on, you think like, what part of the code is he going to zoom in on? You're like, oh, it's like the tree structure. But he zooms in on all the closing things. So it's like the bottom, it's like that closing waterfall.
Yeah.
Or like the
how you can.
Yeah. the sloping, not sloping, the angle that's like closing the pyramid.
Right. Right.
And says, yeah, this is like really this, like developers see this and they don't like it.
Right.
So I mean, this is sort of like the kind of talk where I just, I know I'm going to love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Because it's not about performance or anything. It's about what developers value.
Yeah.
And actually recognizing that developers value this. So
that's true. That's a good point.
So one of his takeaways here is like, well, they were working with PHP, and PHP developers are used of, he says like embedding XML in their code, but I think what he really means is doing, question mark, close angle, and then writing a bunch of HTML, and then open angle, question mark, and writing a bunch of PHP,
right,
and intermixing intermixing the XML with the code,
right.
And so this spiked JSX,
right. I just watched this talk from Lee Byron, I think also from this year, and he said, let's program like it's 1999. And he goes through the like why PHP got popular, and there's a lot of this stuff, and then also what they were developing at Facebook. There was this thing called, my memory is so bad, man. I just watched this. There was this thing called a prepare, where you have these things that all call prepare, and then you like coalesce them, kind of like GraphQL. You had this thing in PHP called like X something, where it was like, anyways, I can't even remember the but it was basically like step by step leading to this kind of thing. So, so keep going. So this led to JSX, right? Because of wanting to meet developers, make it more familiar.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, the PHP developers, it's the same data structure. It's still a tree, but they have a much more positive reaction to it.
Right.
And he makes a good point. They're able to talk about what the thing is actually doing now.
Mm-hmm. They couldn't get past that.
They couldn't get past the syntax before. That closing pyramid of brackets and arrays. So, I thought, just right here, this is great.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So people at Facebook were much more interested in it, and they could actually talk about what it did and how it was like the PHP model, where you just, you change something and you rerun the whole thing. And now that's kind of what's happening with React.
I think early on with React, they recognized a few different things. And I think he talks about what they are, but it was things like functional composition, this idea of immutability.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what they wanted to talk with developers about, but they couldn't. They couldn't get past that. This what I was talking about, that pyramid.
Right.
So JSX lets them do it.
Right.
So
pretty interesting.
Yeah, great.
Then they open source it, and no one can get past JSX,
which is funny. Yeah. So what was the answer here? Because he did say, I think he does say at one point, like, there are situations where you can just let people use the thing and let them recognize how productive they are with it, and that will get them past this initial thing.
That was like yes. I'm not gonna be able to remember what that example was, but
I mean, this might be so. What like we're back. We JSX people did have a very negative reaction when it came out. So what made them get over that? I think he calls it like static friction. So what makes them get over that static friction? Is it the idea that like
the people who were willing to use it at the beginning are then going to be champions of it and convince other people to give it a shot?
Yeah, building bug-free apps. I mean, that's not exactly true, but maybe you do have less bugs than jQuery and Backbone.
Right. Either he or Lee was talking about the original bug in like Facebook's chat messenger thing, which was like the message wouldn't go away and you'd click on a notification that said you had a new message, you were excited and it wouldn't be there. And this thing kept coming back, like it kept coming back. And so that was one of the original things, like talking about how React and like basically declarative rendering makes that impossible. Or you can get a guarantee that that won't happen basically if you just re-render as soon as the state changes or whatever. So it was a super interesting talk. And then he goes on, so he talks about React and why he thinks it was popular. And I found it really interesting in the context of our conversation with Yehuda a few weeks ago, because he basically said people now love React and it's grown and everything. And people will say it's compositional, like it's composable, I mean, and it feels like playing with Lego bricks and putting pieces together. And he says what they're really meaning when they say that is that they like functional programming. Or he basically said almost word for word what Yehuda said, which is that React brought functional programming to the masses. And he believes that. And also some of his original inspiration for React was his belief in the power of the functional programming paradigm and how it is fundamentally like a better way to program than mutation. And he said, he kind of made this like little snarky comment where he was like, you can't say that to people because it like strikes at their identity. So just tell people it's like declarative programming or declarative rendering.
Yeah.
But like he was basically saying the things that people like are basically functional programming. So I thought that was really interesting. I think some people would disagree with him, but like that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. I mean, the awareness to make that statement actually makes me trust React more. It's not just about functional programming for the sake of functional programming's sake. It's functional programming because people like playing with Legos.
Right.
And so that's
a much more compelling argument to people like us than the folks who get up and say you should write your web server in like Haskell or whatever.
Right.
Because it's like technically correct. And you're just, I'm going to give that person the finger and go build my thing, in 10 minutes with Rails or whatever. So yeah, that was pretty interesting. I think I mentioned this last time I watched this talk that was like functional programming in 40 minutes. And it was about like functional programming. And then it was talking about side effects and how we're in the side effects business. Did we talk about this last week?
Yeah, I think we mentioned it.
The things that we care about are the things that programmers hate are side effects because it's like makes it hard to understand your code, but that's like the only thing that the user cares about. And so, it was pretty interesting that in these talks, there's definitely these people definitely believe in they would say like, oh, we used to have functional programming. Did Jordan talk about this? We've actually had these ideas from the beginning.
Yeah.
And once like JavaScript and PHP came along, like mutation just came along, and like that from their perspective, like we went off the rails big time. Mm-hmm. And so that was the whole talk is about Reason. It's at ReasonConf, right? And so he's talking about how Reason, which is a programming language that compiles to JavaScript, but is a functional programming language. JavaScript is partly functional programming language, but it also definitely has mutation. And Reason basically doesn't have mutation. Like it works with immutable data. And he was basically saying like how React got popular. This is the basic premise of the talk. React got popular because it brings functional programming concepts to UI developers.
Functional programming concepts are fun. They feel like you're unlocking some secret skill.
They're fun, and they're just like a better way to write programs. And so, like, conclusion is like, how do we, like, React can only do so much, libraries can only do so much. The way to really get this is to get it at the language level. And the conclusion is like, Reason is the way to do that. That's why I wrote Reason, because I believe that these things, like, how can we bring React to like all the other parts of our code that are not UI components? So that's like the point of the talk. That's like the hypothesis of the talk.
I wonder what he thinks of hooks, because hooks feel like, how do we bring React to the rest of our code? Oh, well, we use hooks.
But hooks are always in a component. So if you have any code that's not in a React component, you're still working with JavaScript.
Right. So it's maybe that hooks aren't enough, and it needs to be like a syntax language level thing. I
think if you were working on a React app, there's still a lot of code that's not in a React component.
Yeah.
Like a reducer. I guess a reducer is like a reducer. Like if you were writing a reducer, like use reducer runs as a hook, but the code that use reducer calls is just JavaScript that doesn't have to abide by like rules of hooks or anything like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't care that it's an instance of a component or anything like that. It's just calling to like your switch statement with like pure logic. And you can implement the reducer with functional paradigms and like not use mutation, but you can also use mutation, right? Because it's just JavaScript.
Right.
So exactly. So, all of our computed properties are just basically JavaScript functions, and Ember, like, all the code and all of our actions in Ember are just JavaScript. It's just JavaScript code. And so all that stuff can use mutation or it cannot. And so I think that's what he's saying.
Yep. Okay.
So it was pretty interesting. I definitely, I think it's a really interesting thing. Like, if you think about the things Yehuda was talking about, the things that a lot of people that I have followed over the years talk about, and like DHH even is not like a purist. This is almost like a purist versus pragmatist kind of thing, right? And he's coming off as more of a purist.
Right. There's nothing in this language that we can do to fix it.
Exactly.
We have to go to functional programming.
Exactly.
And then we can get back on track.
And like the diversion of the programming community into mutable languages like PHP and JavaScript was just like fundamentally like we would look back on that and say that was a misstep in history. Whereas like someone else would say like lots of people have lots of productive apps that are making lots of money with those languages, and there's not anything fundamentally wrong with them. There's like best practices in them. It's almost like a counterfactual argument.
Yeah, I know.
Would they be even better if they had been using, Haskell? Not Haskell, but if the people who designed JavaScript and PHP were like functional programmers at heart.
You could say like if OO never existed, where would we be? Yeah, it's very counterfactual.
Yeah. And then like, I just like Sandy Metz was a huge influence to me, and she talks a lot about these things that are, she has these great talks about how like design can like solve these problems. She walks through and talks about, here's how you would approach it if you had a lot of experience and understood design, and you see exactly how they solve it. But it's like hard to understand that stuff. And like some of the arguments from functional programmers are like the radical simplicity of it. It's like just a function. It's like easy to understand because it's pure and blah, 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 blah. And, there's some interesting things there for sure. But it's kind of fun. It's just like, it's totally like a purist versus pragmatic thing. Like it really is. But it's cool to see, one of the guys who founded React talking about it, because React is very much like a super popular tool that's had a tremendous impact. And I don't know if the average person who uses React thinks of it in that way.
I would say no, just based off kind of the conversations we've had in the last few weeks and seeing talks like that.
Right. But then I guess the question is like, okay, that's not what's important from his perspective, from Jordan's perspective. It's not about whether people know that they're doing functional programming. It's just that it is because of functional programming that it got so popular.
Yeah.
It's basically the premise of the talk, the argument. So it's just kind of an interesting argument to think about. I'm not smart enough to know.
Given that argument, this is a pretty good next stage. Is develop a programming language for these type of things.
Well, this is the other argument. This is the other thought I had watching it, which was like, what if his analysis is just way off? And one of the main reasons React got so popular is because it's like, what they nailed about it is just how easy it is. Like there's so few barriers every step of the way. You don't have to make a new component to register a file to register a component. You don't even have to like use the build tool. Like you could just drop it in. It's just like you just make one little component. Like literally like a p tag is a React component or a React element. Like a function that returns a p tag is a React component.
Yep.
So what if that aspect is actually what's most important? And from that perspective, if that's actually true, if that's the causation, then like asking someone to use a new programming language is like the complete wrong thing to do, because that's a huge ask, which is why like as interested as I am in that talk, like am I actually going to use Reason?
Maybe for a toy app, but yeah.
I'd almost rather learn. I've had that Haskell book that I want to go through. That's actually what I want to go through, because I just feel like that if I want to, there's a lot of this functional stuff I don't understand because I've never written an app in it. But yeah, I don't know. It was interesting, right? Because part of me felt like no one's ever going to use Reason, right? Did you kind of feel like that? Like no one's ever going to use Reason.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do people use Reason?
No, but I don't know the answers, but
you see what I'm saying? Like,
I can look back and say, why haven't I written an app in Elm? Because I feel like a lot of this is
exactly. And like JavaScript is like, you see the approach of like improving JavaScript, and like it's not about the purity. It's about like, it's actually about meeting people where they're at. Maybe that's the most important thing. And if tons of people already know JavaScript, you can improve it even though it's fundamentally mutable in ways that are going to make the job more fun and easier, in the same way that React, meeting people where they're at and giving them one function as a way to make an interactive slider on their homepage of their Rails app was like the best way to meet them where they're at. Yep. So I don't know. I
don't think we can ever, anyone can ever look at like something as complex as React
and tease apart the causation.
Right. You can't. I mean, you can't. Complex systems. Yeah. Like they're too complex. You can't just sum up everything and say, that's the reason.
And you can't break it down. You can't run another controlled experiment and say,
yes.
Yeah. What if React was built with mutability?
Right.
And see if it would have gotten popular.
Well, I do think the answer here, though, is to figure this stuff out, is to do things like, add things like hooks, or add things, or create Reason, like create a new programming language and
right. Our hooks our hooks taking it too far and saying and giving too much weight to the functional side and not enough weight to like meeting people where they're at side. And like there's actually things that are confusing about them that are only confusing because of the way they've decided to implement it using pure functions and no mutation, because that definitely makes things, we've talked about that in our object references episode, where having an object reference actually makes things less surprising and lots of the time. And again, like that conversation I saw was from Ken Wheeler, who is an open source developer and has written a lot of popular React libraries and has been a React developer for years. And I've just been learning for 6 months. But he literally tweeted the same thing that we talked about in that episode, which was like, I understand why the variable is stale in the callback due to a closure in a hook, because that's the way hooks are implemented. But, it's super confusing. And so that's how they got into it. Mm-hmm. So that's an argument in favor of like the meeting people where they're at side.
Yep.
Is more important.
Yes.
So anyways, just kind of interesting. I don't know.
I really like the talk we'll put in the show notes.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it's, I say I really like the talk as, I think in talks in the past where I've watched on Elm, they've been really exciting talks.
Like just not.
But they've also been like, oh, look at all these.
It feels not relevant.
Look at all these things that Elm gives you, like no runtime errors.
Right.
No, like, okay.
I can get no runtime errors if I make a Wix site. I don't want to.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah, that's true. Maybe, yeah.
But it's always been like, oh, look at all these things we have. Where this Reason talk was more about, meeting programmers where they're at. I think he doesn't talk about Reason for like,
I know, till the very end.
And I appreciate that.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. He's setting it up and making the argument that, he had a couple of really nice lines in there. The syntax matters. JSX taught us that the syntax matters. I wasn't even on my radar when I was first toying around with the ideas behind React. And now that it demonstrated to me very clearly that syntax matters. He said syntax is the UI of a programming language, which if you are a UI programmer and you believe that UI matters, and you've said in the past that like the programming syntax doesn't, that's kind of a funny tension there.
Yeah.
And so he's saying like, his basic point is like, it matters. People judge by syntax the way they judged JSX early on. I liked a lot of that stuff in there. It's really cool.
Nice.
Definitely made me interested in Reason for sure. It's just like, I want to build an app. I don't.
No more toy apps.
Question is like, is it still too much in the like purity side?
Well, I think it's what you said earlier. Even if it's like more pragmatic, it comes that fundamentally it's about purity, but it's more pragmatic in that it offers all these libraries and abstractions to make things easier, and you don't have to know what a monad is to use it.
Right.
That might be fine, but it's what you said earlier, where we don't actually know if the reason React got popular is because of the functional ideas.
Right. And if it's not
true,
this
could be a bad road.
Right.
To go
exactly. Down. If it's not true, then it actually is like it's the wrong road. That was like Yehuda's argument, right? That like hooks are the wrong road to go down because
I think
or like whatever comes next, because it's too much. You're sacrificing too much of the ease of use on the altar of a functional paradigm and functional purity. And so, yeah,
his abstractions are better.
Yeah. So his whole thing was about the paradigm doesn't actually matter as much as that's kind of what we're talking about. The opposite side is like meeting people where they're at is more important, which is like another way of saying an abstraction. React was better. React got popular because it offered a better abstraction than the alternatives, not because
yes,
it brought functional programming to the masses.
Right.
Even if it did, it was about the abstraction.
Right.
It was how easy it was to make a component in the Rails app or whatever.
Turn a function into a component. Yes. Exactly. And then there's part of me, like I think my identity or just the way I view programming, like really buys that. Like there's something core in that argument.
Because you've been a productive Rails developer for years, and that's all about mutation. Like there's a lot of that API that's about mutation, and it's never really like, has it gotten in your way when you were doing Rails apps? Like, yeah, we all have stories where like this thing changes this thing out from underneath this thing, and it's like crazy. But that's the thing though, right? Is that because of mutation or is that because of a bad abstraction? So he has this point in the talk where he says he's making the argument that like functional programming is basically better because he shows a function and he's like, you can just understand everything about it. Whereas if this is mutable, he's talking specifically about mutable data. He shows an array and he's like, you have to understand everything that could possibly touch this array for it to change, right? Mm-hmm. If you're in a world of mutation. And like this maybe was from the other talk I watched on functional programming, but the argument is basically, if you have a function that works on an array and it can be changed out from underneath you, like you have to understand the whole system now. Yeah. And that's actually just not true when you're working in an environment like Rails. It is true that things can mutate you, but does that actually happen? Do you actually, if you think about object-oriented design and you have good encapsulation behind methods and stuff, often I find it's much easier to abstract things where I have to understand less of the system working on a good, well-designed object or class, or using a well-designed class from a library or a framework like Rails. It actually seems easier to encapsulate and hide unnecessary details than in the functional code I've seen, where lots of arguments are passed around and sometimes there isn't. Like, I'm not a functional programmer, so I can't really give a charitable version of that. I'm just saying, like, the kinds of doing the OOP work in Rails and what you're nudged to refactor when you learn how to do the Sandi Metz kind of thing felt like that. It didn't feel like I had to understand the whole system at all.
Yeah, also like just experience here. Like I've worked on Rails apps where that situation does happen and you do have to understand the system. Mm-hmm. But I do feel like the way that system had grown over time was it wasn't like a natural. It wasn't like a natural way of growing the system. I guess it did happen that way, but people really stepped over the boundaries and didn't want to do Rails. And
is that proving the point that it wouldn't have that in a functional system? I mean, how is that? I can't believe that every functional system is like, every bad functional system is inherently easier to understand than every bad OOP system. Maybe that's one way of framing the argument. It's kind of interesting.
But this is where, like, I just want to go back to the pragmatic argument and say, okay, but if you use Rails.
Exactly. I've used an OOP abstraction library. I've used a good library based on OOP that I don't run into that with. And so I guess it's not like doomed to this outcome.
I guess I have another like point to make. Like in Rails, where these tricky situations come up, where that mutation leaks, it's because folks are doing things outside of the request response cycle. So they make some singleton and they start attaching data to that. And then there's multiple requests reading and writing, mutating that thing in parallel. I guess not in parallel, but in the request response cycles overlap while the mutation is happening.
I see.
And so I'm wondering that if is there something specific about Rails, its boundaries in HTTP
that
where
shield you from the potential pitfalls of mutation.
Yes, because like the objects that we're mutating are in a nice little HTTP request,
which is almost
box.
like a functional pure function.
I mean, HTTP is stateless. You could say that like an HTTP request is a function with these parameters.
Yeah, that's true. So now the functional programmer is saying, why don't you just bring that to the rest of your code if you love it so much, if you love this purity.
But it's like you said, this is over my head. But maybe there are little boxes that we can draw, and a system like Rails gives us just draws a nice little box around this, and we can do all the OO things,
which are nice in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and think about mutation, and think about array.push. And, not have to worry about that, and then also it doesn't leak out to other requests.
Console.log, it's great.
Yeah. Now
very interesting, man. Very interesting to draw that analogy there. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
And then also with UIs, we don't have nice little boxes.
Yeah.
Because you go from state A to state B to state C back to state A.
It's like multi-threading to the max also because they're all working on the shared UI state, but it's like UIs are very multi-threaded because like things are happening while the user is doing, right?
Yeah. So if like page C can mutate page A, but you haven't been to page A yet, or you've been to page A 3 times, and that might affect the mutation.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just like making up things.
Yeah.
But because we don't have that nice little request response cycle, I wonder if these ideas actually do matter more.
Yep.
In UI programming.
Interesting. Well, that's like a React component is like its own little box, and you can use local variables and like mutate the local variable, but like from the perspective of the system, that component is like a pure function.
I know, but then it breaks down because we want to, like, we get into spots where we want to know, like, on the first time this thing renders, or has this thing been rendered for 5 minutes?
Have I already fetched this thing or whatever?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that kind of messes with our model that, and I don't know.
Interesting. All this stuff about functional programming. Go ahead.
One more on it. UI developers will say it at times. Oh, I wish I could just reload the page.
Oh,
it's that clear state thing.
Oh, dude.
And so there is something.
Window.reload.
Yeah.
There's no question that a model of state management, like in there's no question that there's another thing that Jordan said in the talk. What specific ideas from functional programming did React bring, right? Immutable data, like one-way data flows immutable. And the idea of minimizing state and minimizing side effects. That's were two of the things that he talked about. So it's like, what does minimizing state mean? Well, we didn't really understand or had a good way to talk about that when we were doing jQuery.slideDown, but now we realize when you do $.slideDown from jQuery, you are adding state to your application that's not being tracked in the same place. It's being split. Is open is over here in JavaScript, and the thing is over here in the DOM. So React says avoid the DOM completely. Boom, you centralize your state. You minimize the state. It's the state changing in the state, the proliferation of state, which is problematic. And so there's no question that like a request response, a page reload minimizes that proliferation of state, because the longer you have a single page app open, potentially the more state you have. Like single page app is possible because it's stateful. Like it's a stateful UI. It's also what enables a lot of things, but it's also what makes things complex. So I think there's not the OOP, the mutation perspective is not the idea that like more state is better. It's just that the functional perspective is that like reducing state to the minimum is good. I think those two things are true.
Yes. The is open and slide down is an excellent example of that, because you can have the thing slid down, is open is true, and then someone else slides it up, but they don't know to change is open.
Exactly. Or you create a to-do over here and they don't know that you need to know that. So you want to minimize the state instead of... Anyways, you have more experience with the functional programming stuff. I think having watched all these talks recently and just been, using React and making sense of all this stuff, I think it'd be fun to spend some time with functional patterns the way I did when I first was learning programming and read like Sandy Metz's Principles of OOP, Pooter book, Principles of Object-Oriented Design in Ruby, because I feel like that's when you're like, you're working on a OOP system and you're trying to extend whatever she does. The what was the example? The
dog.
Yeah,
the robot dog.
Yeah, exactly.
That eats, but robots don't eat.
Yeah,
something like that.
Exactly. You get stuck in an inheritance thing, and then you learn like, okay, there's like a better way to do OOP, and this is what design looks like. In the same way, like you do lots of functions, and you run into the problems we've run into with React, which is like, how do I share state? Like, how do I do side effects in a way that's like that's easy, like that doesn't have these bugs that people are. It's not that you have no bugs when you do functional programming, right? People have bugs. Like veterans like Ken Wheeler are complaining about bugs on Twitter, and they've been using React for years. So I think it would be fun to learn about the approaches that work in the functional world in solving some of those bugs and understanding better the trade-offs there. And might be interesting. Maybe I was thinking it'd be fun to do like go through that like Haskell book, but like on YouTube or something, and just like go through it.
Go through each chapter, yeah.
Just like take our time with it, but like talk about it, write some code and stuff. It'd be pretty fun, right?
Yeah. That book is so simple and approachable. And the book is was it Learn You a Haskell for Great Good?
Yeah,
something like that. It's so simple and approachable. And then I'll often find that I'm rereading sections and thinking like, wow, this is so deep. And there's just a much deeper point here, especially like towards the end of the book. And I think when a book can do that, that's just amazing.
That's cool. Very cool.
My experience with FP is the best system I worked on was like a data processing system that would just transform all this data. And before it was like an OO system that was keeping a bunch of flags around, and then other things would flip those flags.
Mm-hmm.
And it was it was awesome to work on. I had other programmers that were more advanced than I was helping there, but yeah,
the FP system was way better suited for.
It was way better.
Yeah.
There was again. I think you can say, well, in that OO system, maybe if you were
Sandy Metz or something.
Yeah, you wouldn't design the OO system like that. You wouldn't just have these globals that things start switching around.
Right.
But
it's also about the pit of success. What do you fall into? And he talks about that in the talk, right?
Yeah.
He mentions
that. Yeah. And just, the FP, like just, I think it highlights a few things like, just it gets you to think more about data structures, more about data, and more about how you transform that data, which is,
it can be helpful. No, there's been times you've looked over my shoulder at Mirage Code and you've seen like the JSON API serializer class that I have. And you're like, you point out like this could, like, you just see what the FP way to do this. Like if you had a recursive function here, you'd be able to avoid doing that or whatever.
Yep.
And so I know that there's a lot I have to learn from that stuff. And I think it's good to know when to use each. And then once you're an expert there, you can decide whether or not Yehuda or Jordan is right. Whether or really, it's not really about. Yehuda has an interesting take on this. It's more about whether the purist. It's kind of like I guess that's kind of like, that's the avatar for a purist versus pragmatist, right?
But, I guess, but back to
I don't hear a lot of OOP purists who say you should avoid functional programming. I guess that's my little hang up there. I haven't heard a lot of OOP people say you shouldn't understand how to use like map reduce functions in your code. Like that's a valid tool. Like that's a useful tool to understand how that works. Or like Adam has this whole map to collections thing, which is like using functional.
This is too simple of an argument. I think if you have a class and that class can mutate its state, how do you feel about that? And I think an OO person would say that's fine. State and mutation can happen together. Where an FP person would be like,
you're beyond
you're beyond help.
Yeah.
I think it's. I want to just step away from this and when I did this FP system, I had looked at I learned Haskell for this, and then I had looked at Snap, which is a web framework for Haskell, and I think it's more like Sinatra than Rails, and I just wrote some stuff in it, and then it was just like, yeah,
it's like Rails with more tiers.
It's not even. It's like writing just
it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it was not. Rails was so much faster. It was
Yeah.
easier to understand, and so yeah, there's where I'm going back to that pragmatic argument.
Right, paradigms, abstractions. In this case, the abstraction made all the difference. The paradigm did not make the difference at all.
And maybe there is an abstraction that is yet to be seen.
Right.
Where we get
The level of Rails.
Yeah, React basically.
Yeah. Yep.
For the web server.
Yep.
Yeah.
Interesting. No, but I definitely recommend folks watch this. I mean, he is a true believer, no question about it. And I think it actually made me like even more confident in like Yehuda's analysis. Yehuda made Ember and, is not a React developer. So in the same way that if I watched a React developer talk about Ember, I'd be like, okay, like, it's an interesting perspective. Is he like Turing capable though? Is he really speaking about Ember the way an Ember developer would? So you could ask the same thing was like someone like Yehuda, who's not a React developer, speaking about React the way a React developer would. And when he said he thinks the way the core team sees React is that it brought functional programming to the masses, and the number one thing that's inspiring, like the most important thing that's inspiring the future API design is the belief in the functional programming paradigm. You watch this talk and you're like, yep, what Yehuda said was 100% correct.
Yes.
In his characterization of it. And then it turns out to be, we still have yet to see whether or not, who's right in a sense, if their analysis of why React got popular is correct, and if they will be able to repeat the success elsewhere. And if it's because, again, it's like you said, there's an infinite time period here where people are going to be talking about why React got popular in the same way that there's going to be an infinite time period of people explaining why the Great Recession of 2008 happened.
Right.
And it's a complex system. And can we learn ultimately what happened? I'm not so sure in either case. And so it's interesting. But certainly if someone is able to repeat the success over and over again, it gives you more confidence that their analysis is correct. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, both with React's APIs and with other frameworks and what they choose to do, like Octane, which is a much better abstraction, but not a new paradigm, actually. It's doubling down on the OOP classes paradigm that are now in JavaScript, which other people are moving away from. So you could actually think of Octane as getting even playing field with like React in terms of its radical simplicity and being a crystallized abstraction. Mm-hmm. Like Ember's had a lot of incidental complexity, so people could blame Ember for being complex because it's OOP, but that actually wouldn't be like the whole story, because there's a lot of like cruft from like before we had ES, right? You see what I'm saying?
So I do.
So that's kind of interesting. And will something, whether it's Ember Octane or something else, like, Vue is based on, that's another good counterexample, right? Vue got super popular. It's based on mutation.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean what Jordan's saying is completely wrong.
I mean, when you talk about Vue, I want to go to the abstraction thing.
Yeah.
Good abstractions.
Yeah. Interesting though, right?
Maybe you can like backdoor the paradigm. Maybe you can get me to write FP without me thinking about it.
No, that's exactly what he was talking about.
Right.
React got everyone to do that.
But
you're saying instead of having to learn Haskell and having these people yell at you or whatever, and
the fact that we're
painful
talking,
APIs.
The fact that we're talking about FP means that FP is leaking from React. I don't know. Is that fair to say?
Well, they like you to think that. They certainly believe that is true.
Okay.
That's exactly, they believe that's true. They believe that.
And they want you to be aware of it.
Well,
so
they do if you're watching the conference talk. They don't want you to have to know that if you're a user, but.
No, but they want you to be aware of it, and they can say, look, we can, this is a reason React is popular, so let's crank the dial up and go to a full FP language for expressing UIs.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. But can you just keep layering abstractions without ever telling me about FP?
Yeah.
And I'm going to be super successful, but I'm just not going to. Yeah. It's like Legos.
Yeah.
Right? That's a great statement.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting, though. Love to get all these people in a room and just like let them go at it, And then like drop a cage and give them all weapons like Mad Max. That's it. You didn't think we were going to resolve this tonight, but we are. 3 enter, 1 leaves. That's it.
Is there like a good joke here? Like, oh, I can't destroy you because
no side effects.
Side effects.
Eat mutation. Okay, we're gonna stop. All right. Well, that was a little bit long, 45 minutes. But if you're still with us, we're thankful for you. We are thankful for our listeners and EmberMap subscribers, and everyone lets us spend our time teaching and talking about this cool stuff. So hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving in the U.S. and everyone else is enjoying some time off as America takes time off. Hopefully that is how it works. And thanks for sticking around. We'll see you next week.
Bye.